Guten Abend. I'm afraid that's the only German that I can speak, so I do apologize for the fact I'm having to speak in Berlin in English. First of all, I'd like to thank Dr. Macho for that very generous introduction and indeed for the invitation to come here and to be the first speaker in this enormously important and exciting series that concerns anyone who is going to be a citizen of the 21st century. And why I'm delighted to be here is I'd love to share with you an exploration of a very important question, which is what kind of people are your children and your grandchildren going to be? And my central idea is that now is the time, unlike any other time in human history, the 100,000 years that we have been around, now is a very special time in that the technologies and an environment that we're creating with both biomedical science and physical sciences is giving us both the opportunity and the threat to have a different type of person. So what we're going to look at is this very interesting concept of the human mind. So what is it about our human brains, especially our human brains, that makes us so different from, let's say, that of the goldfish? Well, this is what you look like in the first 2 years of your life. And you can see here the blobby bits are the brain cells, and the stringy bits are the connections between the brain cells. And I hope you can see that here, I'm showing here, I can't really turn around here, but you can see here in the newborn, 3 months, 15 months, and 2 years, the biggest change is not the increase in brain cells, but the growth of the connections between brain cells. So this means that if you are a twin even, genetically identical, the exciting thing is that you're going to have a unique configuration of brain cell connections. Now this is what we in neuroscience, we call it plasticity. Now this doesn't mean, of course, that the brain is made of plastic, but more it comes from the Greek to mold, plastikos. And this is a wonderful experiment I'm going to tell you about now that was done in the States, that shows just how sensitive your brain is to what you do and to your environment, that helps mold your connections. Now, this was an experiment involving 3 groups of adult human volunteers, none of whom could play the piano. Now, if you ever get the chance to participate in such an experiment, a word of advice, try and not be in the control group, because the controls just had to stare at a piano for 5 days. Pretty boring. The next group, however, the luckier group, they learnt 5-finger piano exercises. And there was a third group, and I'm going to keep them as a surprise for you. And what we're going to look at in a minute are the brain scans from these 3 groups of adult humans over 5 days to see what happened as at least one group was learning to play the piano. So if you look first at the control group, you can see that over the 5 days, the brain is literally unimpressed. Literally, nothing's happened. The brain scans look the same. Now look at the center group, those who are physically playing the piano, and of course you can see there is an astonishing change in the brain territory relating to the digits, even over 5 days. Remarkable. But what I suggest to you, more remarkable still, are the third group. And really, we could spend the whole evening, I think, discussing this experiment, because look at this third group. As you can see, these people just had to imagine they were playing the piano. And can you see how it's pretty much the same as just physically playing the piano? So we can learn a lot from this. The first is that even a thought can change what your brain, your physical qualities in your brain. And the other is that imagining something is seemingly the same as doing it. And in fact, someone called Hunekowitz, an Austrian who developed the treatment for Parkinson's in the 1960s, he came up with a wonderful quote. He said, "Thinking is movement confined to the brain. Thinking is movement confined to the brain." And you can see here that that is the case. That the only difference between these 2 groups of people is that one group were thinking about it and then contracting muscle, and the other group were just thinking about it, and the brain scans are very similar. So I'd like to suggest to you that the biological basis of the mind is the personalization of the brain through unique dynamic configurations of neuronal connections that are driven by your experiences. So if that is the case, are we facing a sunrise or a sunset? Could it be that now we have the most marvelous opportunity to exploit and become different and wonderful individual human beings? Or because of the very vulnerability of our brains, are we facing severe problems with this unprecedented environment? So, for the first time ever, I'd like to suggest to you that given the plasticity of the brain, that there's various scenarios. And I'm going to do two scenarios very quickly, and then the third scenario take more time over, because that is the one that I think is dominating in this century. The first scenario I'd like to call the someone scenario. The someone scenario, I'm sure everyone's familiar with Posh and Beck's here. The someone scenario is where you are a someone. You are different from other people. You stand apart from other people. We accept that in Western society. It seems to be something that's been around for a long time. And it actually was started with this man, Baroness, who was the nephew of Freud, who actually realized when he was confronted with how to sell people things that they didn't need, but they might want, how you might do this. And the reason he's got this lady, oh, sorry, we've got this lady, let me go back. We've got this lady here smoking a cigarette, was because he was famous for doing something very interesting. At a time when young women didn't smoke, they wanted to increase the number of people buying cigarettes. And they asked Baroness to come up with an idea to get women to smoke. This was in the 1920s. And he came up with this idea that having a pretty young woman smoking and saying it was the torch of freedom. It would say something about you if you smoked a cigarette. You would look free and you would look liberated. Notice he didn't say you'll enjoy it, you need it, but you will look, people will think about you in a different way. And this set the kernel as a very good example of how much of advertising now has picked up that idea that we all want to be someone, we want to be individual, we want people to think in a certain way about us because of the very symbols that we are using. So one could say about the someone scenario, consumerism, that yes, you're an individual, yeah, you're an individual if you like, but you're never fulfilled. So it's not really a very happy situation to look at for the future, I don't think. Another is the opposite, and here we have an example of a mass movement where people seem to have sublimated their individuality, and we'll call that scenario the anyone scenario. So the anyone options, I'd suggest to you, may give people fulfillment, but you are not an individual. You are subsumed under a collective narrative. Now I'd like to spend more time thinking about the one that perhaps concerns us most immediately, which is the nobody scenario. Now, what do I mean by the nobody scenario? Well, what I mean is just this, and I don't know how it is for children in Germany, but I was alarmed to read this in the British papers, that nowadays, between a child's 10th and 11th birthday, they are spending 900 hours in class, just under 1,300 hours with their family, and look at this, just under 2,000 hours in front of a screen. Now, given, as I hope I have, you're persuaded that the human brain is very sensitive to the environment, I put it to you, the environment is changing here very radically. So what does it mean if you put a young brain especially, or any brain, and an environment for a long period of time that is a screen-based environment? Might it change the way they are thinking and feeling? Well, this was first of all suggested, and you can see here in Newsweek. On one hand, they thought that on the left, you can see a child like some kind of dominant cyborg. And on the right, Time magazine, the child is some kind of victim. The nobody scenario would have no fulfillment and no individuality. The anyone scenario, fulfillment, no individuality. The someone scenario we saw, individuality but no fulfillment. There must be another way. I sound like the British elections at the moment. You may have followed this. Everyone's agonizing about another way to the current problems we're having. So what's here? What's the fourth option here? Well, I would like to suggest to you it's creativity. By being creative, by putting things together, you are expressing your unique take on the world and in a way that's satisfying for you and ideally useful for society. Let's think about creativity. And I know there's at least one artist here, so I feel slightly embarrassed showing this kind of thing. But this kind of picture is a deconstruction of how we would normally see a person. It's a deconstruction to abstract shapes and colours and form to a certain extent, just as we saw the child starts off. So should it be or could it be that by being like a child you will be automatically creative? Well, here's a painting by a friend of mine's little girl when she was 4. She was called Phoebe, and she painted this sheep. Now, you have to admit, this is unusual. You don't have sheep with purple heads and magenta bodies and turquoise ears. Now, why isn't this sheep not hanging in an art gallery somewhere, I wonder? Because surely, not only has it deconstructed the notion of sheep, but it's brought together something unusual. Why is this sheep not a work of art? It's not creative, whereas this sheep is. Damon Hirst's sheep. What's the difference? Apart from they're turning in different directions. My suggestion is that the importance is that both have deconstructed ideas of a sheep. Both have done something unusual to the sheep, but what Hirst has done is he's made you think about other things. You're seeing the world in a new way. It might not be a way you like or you agree with, but you certainly think in a different way to how you did before. And for me, that is the third important step of creativity. It's deconstructing or challenging things like children will do, like drug addicts will do, like schizophrenics will do. It's bringing together new things, like children will do, like schizophrenics will do, like addicts will do. But unlike those groups, the crucial step is it must say something that makes you see the world in a new way. And it is the same, incidentally, with science as well. So for the first time in 100,000 years, I think the human mind could be radically changed. But let's be honest, it's not so bad. Sometimes it's good to be a someone. If you're fulfilling yourself, if you've set yourself a goal, you've worked hard and you've achieved it. I remember I took 7 goes to pass my driving test, and when I finally achieved that, I was a terrible driver. I felt very proud of myself. Yeah, and rightly so, I think. Yeah. No, I haven't driven since. But, the nobody scenario, we all like times when we are abandoned, where we are not self-conscious, where we forget about the mortgage and our worries, where we can just appreciate the snow or the sun on our faces and our bodies. We like that. Similarly, the anyone scenario, that's good too sometimes if we're working as a team and we're sublimating our selfish agenda for the good of a collective. That can be good as well. So I think the trick is not so much to opt for any one of these scenarios, but as always, it's a question of balance. It's a question of having all those things in part of the portfolio of being human. Sometimes to be anyone, sometimes to be someone, sometimes to be no one, and sometimes to say, Eureka. Thank you very much.